Burkina Faso's interim president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, made headlines by intercepting a convoy of 47 trucks loaded with weapons, disguised as humanitarian aid. The seizure sparked urgent questions. Who sent these arms? What was their intended purpose? This video will expose the discovery and its unfolding ramifications. The sun was already low on the horizon when the alert went out. On a remote road near the eastern border of Burkina Faso, security forces had flagged something unusual: a long convoy of trucks, 47 in total, rolling in from the Togo frontier. Painted with neutral tones and marked with symbols suggesting humanitarian aid, the convoy bore the appearance of a relief operation, a sight not uncommon in a region battered by drought, displacement, and insurgent violence. But something didn't sit right with the local customs unit. The documentation was vague, the drivers unconvincing. It was the kind of uneasy feeling that comes not from what's visible, but what's missing. What was supposed to be a routine checkpoint inspection on May 27, 2025, quickly became the spark that ignited a national scandal. When authorities pried open the containers, they found no medicine, no food rations, no emergency tents. Instead, they uncovered crates packed with rifles, boxes of ammunition, stacks of high-grade explosives, and military communications equipment. Some of the weapons bore markings unfamiliar to the region's forces. Others had their serial numbers scraped off. The cache was significant enough to arm a small militia. The news traveled fast. By morning, government officials had confirmed the seizure of all 47 trucks. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old leader of Burkina Faso and former army officer who came to power in a 2022 coup, was briefed immediately. It wasn't just the volume of weapons that shocked him. It was the blatant way they had been disguised as humanitarian aid, an act that violated both national sovereignty and international humanitarian norms. Within hours, the government released a short but firm statement confirming the interception. No group had yet claimed ownership. The drivers were detained, and an initial investigation began. Burkina Faso authorities were careful with their wording, refusing to jump to conclusions. But the implications were clear. Someone, somewhere, had sent nearly 50 trucks of arms into a fragile country, teetering on the edge of civil conflict. The convoy's discovery came amid rising tension in the region. Burkina Faso has been one of the countries hardest hit by jihadist insurgency in West Africa, with militant groups affiliated with both ISIS and Al-Qaeda operating freely in parts of the north and east. For the last 3 years, Captain Traoré's government has been waging an aggressive military campaign to reclaim territory and restore order. His leadership has emphasized African sovereignty, cutting military ties with France and forging new partnerships with Russia and other non-Western allies. The weapon trucks, it seemed, had arrived at a particularly volatile moment. As news of the seizure circulated, questions began piling up. Who sent the weapons? Were they intended for domestic rebels, terrorist groups, or perhaps even mercenary forces? Why the disguise? And why now? Security experts speculated that the convoy may have been trying to exploit the region's humanitarian crisis as cover. In the Sahel, where thousands of people are internally displaced and many live on international aid, trucks labeled with relief markings are often waved through with minimal inspection. Whoever organized the transport understood the terrain and knew the system well enough to try to bypass it. Local journalists dug deeper. Some reported that the convoy originated in Lomé, the capital of Togo, though that claim has not been officially confirmed. The government of Togo has so far made no public statement on the matter. Inside Burkina Faso, however, officials were beginning to suspect that the shipment may be tied to a broader network of illicit arms flows, part of the same underground trade that has kept insurgent groups armed and mobile in defiance of regional efforts to stamp them out. But it was the sheer size of the convoy that disturbed analysts most. 47 trucks was not a rogue effort. It was organized, funded, executed with precision, and had it not been intercepted, It would have injected an unprecedented volume of weapons into a volatile region already plagued by armed conflict. For Captain Traoré, this wasn't just a threat, it was a test. His administration had already pledged to cleanse the military of corruption and root out covert support for armed factions. The convoy incident offered both a justification for his policies and a warning that Burkina Faso's internal struggles were part of a much larger chessboard. As soldiers stood guard over the seized trucks, the country's intelligence services began a full audit of the convoy's contents. They documented weapon origins, serial codes, and ballistic details to trace where the arms may have been manufactured or previously shipped. Meanwhile, the drivers were held for questioning at a secure facility, reportedly cooperating only partially with investigators. In the days that followed, state media emphasized the importance of vigilance and unity. Traoré's message to the public was one of defiance. Burkina Faso would not be destabilized by foreign hands or internal betrayal. While no conclusive answers had yet emerged, the nation now knew what was at stake. What began as a quiet evening checkpoint inspection had become something far greater, a revelation of how deeply embedded the threat had become, and how determined certain actors were to keep the fires of conflict burning. The 47 trucks never reached their destination, but the questions they raised had already crossed every border. Night had fallen along the Togo-Burkina Faso border when the first troubling sign emerged. A local informant reported hearing engines rumbling through the night. Security forces, on high alert following alerts of suspect activity, moved in swiftly. As dawn approached on May 27, 2025, what appeared to be a humanitarian convoy, 47 aid-labeled trucks, was halted in its tracks. The scene swiftly turned high stakes. The initial shock came from the quantity, nearly 50 trucks, far more than any legitimate aid organization would send. Humanitarian convoys rarely number more than a handful of vehicles, especially at night in such sensitive zones. That alone raised suspicions. Authorities acted on instinct, and intelligence strands that pointed to a deliberate ploy. Unloading revealed the scale of deception. The cover story unraveled. AK-47s numbering in the tens of thousands, anti-aircraft missiles, rocket launchers, grenades, explosives, and even communications gear fit for coordinated combat. Some crates held older weapons seen in conflicts spanning Yemen, Syria, and Libya. Others were freshly minted, virgin arms never before fired. At this scale, it was no rogue smuggler's job. Behind the operation lay a sophisticated network, coordinated departure times, multiple routes, but all converging on this point. Interrogations revealed that each driver had accepted a simple job: deliver aid. They stated they knew nothing more, yet arriving nearly simultaneously, using different paths, suggested direction from a central organizer. When met with pressure, the drivers stumbled, claiming they didn't know what they carried and were paid to deliver humanitarian relief. The intelligence picture grew murkier. Investigators traced the initial filings of the convoy to a staging point in Lomé, Togo's capital. Although Togo's government offered no comment, Burkina Faso security services reportedly initiated a parallel inquiry across the border. Some detail emerged. Weapons were reportedly meant for several private warehouses in Ouagadougou, the capital. Those warehouses were owned, allegedly, by a skin-deep network of former generals and high-profile businessmen. The weapons were to be dispersed across rebel sanctuaries, likely in the east, near the Côte d'Ivoire border. This dovetailed with a disturbing theory. Foreign-backed coup squads may have been positioned within the country, ready and equipped. Those private warehouses, gang members or profiteers posing among the elite, would have held the weapons until activation day. Why now? It wasn't random timing. In the months leading up to the seizure, Jama'at Nusrat al-Islam wa al-Muslimin, JNIM, had been on the offensive, overrunning towns and executing devastating attacks, particularly in March and early April 2025. Notably, on March 28, JNIM dealt a crippling blow to the Burkina Faso army in Diapaga, leaving over 60 soldiers dead. This chaotic security landscape had provoked a fierce backlash from Captain Traoré's government. In March and April, security forces and volunteer defense militias carried out sweeping Green Whirlwind II operations, arguably overzealous, leading to civilian massacres in western provinces, killing over 130 ethnic Fulani people. Such actions, while brutal, were described by the junta as necessary to root out insurgents, yet for the same reason, they created fertile ground for recruitment among jihadist groups. Each massacre deepened grievances, enabling JNIM's recruitment and territory control. The seizure of 47 trucks, specialists now say, may have been planned to reinforce armed factions with superior firepower, just as the civilian backlash was swelling. Yet speculation only goes so far. Captain Traoré ordered a full audit, serial numbers, ballistic tracing, satellite imagery, and a regional push to follow the weapon trail. This is not mere smuggling, he would say publicly. This is a targeted attempt to arm those who wish to destabilize our nation. Some analysts point to foreign influence reaching into ex-colonial powers or clandestine networks. Others hint at Russia's growing footprint. In neighboring Mali, Russian-affiliated Africa Corps, a successor to Wagner mercenaries, had been tracked supplying heavy arms, including artillery and armored vehicles, by sea to Guinea and overland to the Sahel. Could a parallel operation have funneled weapons further west to Burkina Faso? Adding to the complexity, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are in the throes of renegotiated security ties, letting France exit while courting Russia and Turkey. Journalists, analysts, and even state officials lay blame in every direction. Rogue generals, jihadist sympathizers, diaspora networks, foreign intelligence, transnational arms dealers tied to conflict zones in Libya and beyond. What united them all was one clear fact: the sophistication of the convoy operation and the value of the arms, estimated at upward of $100 million, left nothing accidental. As Traoré's administration brings forensic detail to the investigation, regional partners in ECOWAS and the UN are watching closely. The crackdown isn't isolated. It's part of a wider effort to challenge arms trafficking across West Africa's porous borders and deny resources to insurgent networks. Indeed, regional cooperation showed early promise. Partners across Mali and Niger began checking convoys, tightening customs oversight, and sharing intel on suspicious movements. But the sheer scale of this operation served as a stark warning. Organized smuggling rings were no longer small-time operators. They were staging global-scale ambushes on fragile states under guise. Inside Burkina Faso, Captain Traoré used the incident to reinforce internal messaging. He reiterated that sovereignty was non-negotiable, that any covert interference, be it internal or external, would be met with force, conviction, and exposure. But the real question remained: who was smart and bold enough to attempt this? And how many of those 47 trucks were already past checkpoints, now dispersed across hidden caches? The seizure had unmasked one plot, but likely only one cell in a sprawling network of intent. Behind it lay planners, financiers, and potential foreign sponsors. For the people of Burkina Faso, the seizure sparked unease and defiance. They saw stolen weapons substituted for food, hidden by false promises. A bomb-laden convoy masquerading behind aid trucks ignited mistrust, not just of smugglers, but of the framework that makes aid possible. International NGOs, local authorities, unscrupulous intermediaries. A humanitarian uniform no longer guaranteed goodwill. Yet in that very moment, Captain Traoré found common ground with war-weary civilians and frustrated soldiers alike. All had seen lives disrupted by jihadist bombings, civilian massacres, forced displacements, some as old as 2021, and both state and rebel violence. The ship of state, once rocked, found newfound purpose and visibility. The weapons would be cataloged, their story shared. This convoy would not reach its target, and the country would be watching. The morning after the convoy seizure, the capital was alive with tension. Rumors circulated in the streets of Ouagadougou. and every television channel replayed footage of armed soldiers surrounding the immobile trucks. Behind the scenes, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was taking control of the narrative. He understood that this was more than a smuggling crackdown. It was a defining moment that could test the legitimacy of his government and shift regional dynamics. Within 48 hours, Traoré convened a national press conference, held in the austere courtyard of the presidential palace. Armed personnel stood discreetly at every corner, a sign of both authority and caution. As the interim leader took the podium, his expression was tight with resolve. He began by thanking the military and customs officers whose vigilance had uncovered the convoy. Then he delivered a sober, forceful message. He described the 47 vehicles, disguised as aid, but filled with arms intended to fuel conflict in the Sahel. He called the act a direct attack on our sovereignty, and affirmed that it showed the lengths to which shadowy forces would go to undermine Burkina Faso's stability. He revealed that forensic teams were beginning ballistic tracing on weapons and watermarks on crates to establish points of origin. Traoré took care to speak not just of weapons seized, but of the struggle ahead, underscoring that such schemes had been growing bolder, with mounting logistical sophistication. That same night, state radio aired a recorded segment in which Traoré appealed directly to the people. This convoy was not destined for us. It was set to destabilize our communities. He urged Burkinabe citizens to report suspicious vehicles, warehouses, or individuals, promising total protection for tipsters. The message resonated, tapping into widespread anxiety over rising insurgent violence and recent civilian casualties. For many, the seizure became proof that the government was prepared to fight not just in the field, but in the corridors of power. In the days that followed, Traoré embarked on a media blitz. Interviews with foreign correspondents emphasized the international dimension of the threat. The flow of weapons through the Sahel is more sophisticated than anyone realized, he told one. He framed the convoy as a wake-up call, one that demanded urgent reforms to border control, intelligence sharing, and military supply oversight. He also stated that diplomats from neighboring countries had been briefed, and that ECOWAS would support any coordinated response. Inside the army, the seizure boosted morale. Soldiers, weary from grueling counterinsurgency campaigns, saw in Traoré's public stance an affirmation of their mission: to defend Burkina Faso from internal breakdown and external interference. In base camps and forward positions, troops spoke more openly about intercepting arms flows, now confident their efforts had political backing, not just tactical purpose. International observers noted that Traoré avoided blaming any single country outright. Instead, he emphasized an eventual proper attribution, not through reckless finger-pointing, but through careful intelligence and forensics. He emphasized that rushed accusations could harm diplomatic ties, and insisted investigators would follow the evidence wherever it led. This measured tone was seen as a deliberate choice, an effort to assert authority without provoking regional backlash, yet refusing to release the investigation's full details. Meanwhile, forensic technicians worked in government warehouses where the weapons were now displayed under controlled light. Serial numbers were cross-checked against international arms databases. Rust on certain rifles suggested North African or Libyan origins. Serial stamped boxes hinted at European production. Ballistic experts confirmed some munitions were compatible with weapons used in recent jihadist assaults. What emerged was a patchwork, a global stew of weapon origins pointing to an international trafficking chain. Traoré visited the impounded site himself. He walked past crates and missile tubes, his military vest sterilized to prevent contaminating evidence. Reporters captured the moment he touched a grenade launcher and looked into empty cases that once held anti-aircraft rounds. It was a gallery of shame and proof, a physical demonstration of the covert plans thwarted by a customs checkpoint. Complementing the public messaging, military and civilian intelligence teams launched joint operations in Ouagadougou. They searched suspected warehouses and interviewed local business figures. Official reports confirmed some earlier alerts had come from social media chatter. Telegram groups had claimed massive arms shipments were en route for patriotic brigades. Though analysts warned against jumping too quickly from Telegram hype to operational truth, officials took them seriously and corroborated with communications intercepts and satellite data. Traoré's government also coordinated closely with ECOWAS. At a brief regional security meeting in Accra, he relayed details of the convoy and encouraged synchronized border enforcement. States agreed to tighten customs checks on trucks marked with Red Cross or UN insignia, confirming their authenticity using accreditation lists. The effort was modest, but symbolic. A public display of collective resolve. Back home, members of civil society expressed relief at the interception and call for transparency. NGOs issued cautious praise, while urging that weapons trafficking often thrives in humanitarian gray zones. They pressed for protections to ensure genuine aid was not hindered. Traoré addressed these concerns directly, announcing joint military NGO task forces to verify relief convoys during the rainy season when aid flows intensify. By the end of the week, Burkina Faso's social media lit up, not with images of bloodshed, but of civic pride. Citizens displayed the hashtag number Nous sommes vigilants, we are vigilant, celebrating the intercepted convoy as proof that the state was still capable of defending its sovereignty. Meanwhile, outside the country, African newswire services circulated summaries of Traoré's statements, framing them as a potential turning point in how the Sahel manages arms trafficking. Yet Traoré knew the road ahead was perilous. Public statements were only the start. The investigation was ongoing. Regional cooperation remained fragile. Foreign sponsors, if identified, might respond with countermeasures, supply other routes, escalate influence operations, or sow diplomatic discord. But for now, on home soil, Traoré had turned the seizure into a rallying cry. He wrapped up his communications blitz with a soliloquy in the presidential palace, broadcast into thousands of villages. He vowed that whoever financed or directed the weapons convoy, whether from shadowy private hospitals, war profiteering elites, networks in exile, or foreign intelligence agencies, would be held accountable. It was a promise deeply rooted in the moment, confronting hidden hands and affirming that the state could still expose them. The seizure of 47 trucks may have been a crisis, but under Captain Traoré's leadership, it became a moment of reinvention. He was charting a course for Burkina Faso's future, more vigilant borders, stronger regional ties, and a message sent loud and clear. This nation would not be undermined in darkness. The 47-truck arms convoy had not just rattled officials in Ouagadougou, it reverberated across capitals from Bamako to Niamey, from Abuja to Accra. In that moment, border checkpoints from Mali through Niger became flashpoints of concern, each state sensing a challenge to its own fragile stability. Inside the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, a wave of alarm swept through the regional bloc. At a meeting convened in Abuja, defense ministers shared intelligence, regional chiefs briefed on the latest forensic findings, and customs agencies agreed on stricter oversight for vehicles bearing humanitarian markings. For the first time in months, an ECOWAS summit felt urgent and unified rather than routine. The meme of 47 trucks, orchestrated, coordinated, and nearly clandestine, served as tangible evidence that the Sahel's insecurities were not isolated to one country. In Mali, recovering from its own coup and militarized politics, authorities began re-examining recent arms convoys transiting toward Burkina's border. Custom posts, previously undermanned and overwhelmed, received fresh reinforcements from ECOWAS training teams. In Niger, field agents checked convoys more rigorously, often requiring NGO drivers to submit manifests days in advance, slowing down aid, but also pinpointing gaps where weapons might have slipped through. Out west, Ivory Coast's military began cooperating more directly with Ouagadougou. Shared barracks and training programs in border towns fostered intelligence sharing. Within weeks, these exchanges yielded results. A cache of suspected ammunition headed to Burkina was intercepted in Bonduku. hinting that the convoy may have been just one branch of a broader network. Russia, through military liaisons and diplomatic channels in Ouagadougou, offered forensic support. They supplied ballistic examiners who scoured weapon serials and crate watermarks, searching for ties to Eastern European or former Soviet arsenals. Turkish military advisors dispatched technicians to customs hubs to train officers in detecting false humanitarian stamps and hiding techniques. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso's pivot away from France and toward non-Western security partners came sharply into focus. French sources, though largely silent on the convoy, noted the political optics. A coup-installed government now aligning with alternative power centers, even as its neighbors reached out to France for technical assistance. In Ghana and Benin, France's intelligence-sharing networks remained active. Their openness to sharing border data with Burkina became a closely watched barometer of Western interest in Sahel stability. At home, the incident galvanized domestic policy. Traoré's council approved the formation of a national security task force, uniting military, intelligence, customs, and civil society representatives. Their mission: detect and dismantle arms corridors, verify humanitarian shipments, and root out any internal collaborators, officials or power brokers with hidden ties to trafficking networks. Parliament was tasked with reviewing border fence plans and deploying drones for aerial surveillance. Civil society groups, once vocal critics of military overreach, now joined the chorus, issuing statements calling on the government to balance security with rights. Their point: crackdown on illicit convoys should not morph into anti-aid barriers. This tension drove policy. Aid shipments would require biometrics, seals, and real-time tracking, while military teams inspected each during transit. The regional ripple extended to the United Nations. The UN's Office for West Africa and the Sahel, or UNOWAS, publicly welcomed Burkina Faso's transparency, urging all states to prevent the abuse of humanitarian cover. They offered funding for cargo scanners at key border points. Likewise, the UN Panel on Arms Violations in West Africa flagged the incident in its annual report, using it to illustrate escalating sophistication in illicit weapon flows. Yet amid the momentum lay sobering uncertainty. Would this regional surge hold? Burkina Faso's economy was already under strain, and prolonged military-civil crises risked derailing counterinsurgency gains. There were fears of retaliation. Shadow networks or foreign backers might shift routes, intensify recruitment, or flood markets via Niger or remote desert tracks. For Captain Traoré, the weeks ahead were pivotal. He had convened a mini-summit with Mali and Niger leaders in Ouagadougou, one aimed at synchronizing rules of engagement along borders and co-owning the narrative in global media. He emphasized that Burkina was not defiant, but determined to protect all Sahel nations from being victims of unseen wars. Civilians too watched closely. Many had lost homes and loved ones to jihadist assault groups. They feared war fatigue. But signs of unity, soldiers checking convoys, diplomats meeting, journalists sharing forensic photos, offered guarded hope. People saw the state not just as a distant power, but narrowing the gap between the palace, the checkpoint, and everyday life. At an international level, monitor states like the United States, the European Union, China, and GCC powers acknowledged that the Sahel had entered a new era of contested influence. Weapons flows were no longer patchwork smuggling. These were modular systems, coordinated movements leveraging the chaos of interlinked coups and armed groups. Global nonprofits operating in the Sahel took note. Aid charities prepared new compliance systems. Analysts revised risk protocols. For them, 47 trucks illustrated that humanitarian relief and brutality could repurpose logos identically. They reinforced warehouse immunity protocols, secured staff travel, and embraced stronger community liaison work. Through all this, the question remained: would this collective response stem the tide, or just reroute it? Traoré's government and its partners set a test in motion. Block one network, reveal its weaknesses, and expose the actors. They were repositioning the Sahel from a theater of anonymous violence into a contested zone under scrutiny. As the sun set on another dusty Ouagadougou evening, local news showed images of the seized convoy, soldiers guarding it, UN and ECOWAS badges pinned side by side. These visuals played on regional television, on Nigerian and Ghanaian channels, even crossed into Arabic language services covering Africa. The message was clear: the Sahel was waking up, but no single moment could change decades of instability. The convoy had been stopped, but the network was still alive. As Burkina Faso braced for the next moves, neighbors tightened borders, and the international community logged the whole scene. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We're just getting started. Check out the other videos on the channel. You'll want to see more.